Welcome, good morning to everybody joining from Australia, and good afternoon to those of you joining us from New Zealand today. I'd like to begin by acknowledging the traditional owners of the land in which we meet today. In my case, that's the Wurundjeri people of the Kulin Nation, and pay my respects to elders past and present. My name is Sam Platt. I am the Commercial Partnerships Manager for Fairtrade Australia and New Zealand. As a little bit of housekeeping to begin, this is going to be an interactive Q&A session. So if you do have any questions throughout the conversation, please do feel free to put those into the question and answer box at the bottom of your screen through Zoom, and we'll make sure to get to those at the end. This webinar is kicking off our Fairtrade Fortnight campaign for 2024, which is a 2-week period in which all of our wonderful partners across both Australia and New Zealand come together to talk about fair trade, the impact that they make through selling fair trade products to consumers, and ultimately the impact that is created for farmers at origin as well. So this year's theme for the campaign is called Fair for All, for farmers, for brands, for you. So to give you a bit of a flavor of what fair looks like and what we mean by that, for farmers, fair trade means that they receive a fair price and can invest to protect their communities and the environment. Fair trade for brands is a trusted partner to enable their commitments to ethical and responsible sourcing. And fair trade for consumers is the assurance that every fair trade purchase makes a positive impact for people and planet. And for some of you joining that may be a little bit less familiar with fair trade, I wanted to just briefly mention some of the impact stats that we have put together most recently in our impact report for this year, looking at data from 2023. And the number which really jumps out to me every year is the amount of fair trade premium that is generated. In 2023, that was over 3.3 million Australian dollars in premium, which goes directly back to farming communities as a direct result of the fair trade purchases made across Australia and New Zealand. That money goes back to the farming communities, and they democratically amongst themselves decide how they want to spend it to benefit their business, on social projects, and also to protect the environment. We're really lucky to have 121 fabulous licensees across both Australia and New Zealand that put the fair trade mark on those products, and through those sales generate those premiums and that impact at the farm level. Globally, we work with 1,910 fair trade certified producer organizations across 68 countries, which you can see highlighted there in white on that map. That's more than 2 million farmers and workers in fair trade certified producer organizations. 44% of the workers are women, and globally, over 350 million Australian dollars in fair trade premium was generated by global fair trade sales in 2022, which is our most recent data. So you can see that it really, really does add up and makes a huge, tremendous impact at farm level. Now, today's conversation is going to be about cocoa. So I wanted to share a little bit of insight into fair trade cocoa specifically. So fair trade ANZ licensees who sell chocolate products, they purchased over 1.7 million kilograms of cocoa and sold that on fair trade terms in 2023. Globally, we work with over 450,000 fair trade cocoa farmers. That's 22% of all fair trade workers in the system. So it's a very important commodity for us as fair trade. And 17% of small scale fair trade cocoa farmers are also women, and that is just those that are members as part of the organization. I want to add that women are extremely involved in the cocoa production process, and so the actual number of women involved is much, much higher than that. Now, I have the absolute pleasure of introducing our expert guest speaker for today. Carolyn Kitto is the co-director of Be Slavery Free, a not-for-profit organization dedicated to eradicating modern slavery. Be Slavery Free leads the Chocolate Scorecard project, and Carolyn is a key member of the Chocolate Scorecard core team, dedicated to transparency of the cocoa supply chain, to ensure that we can all choose better chocolate for people and for the planet. Carolyn, good morning, and thank you so much for joining us.
Yeah, thanks, Sam. It's great to be having this conversation.
Thank you.
If I could just acknowledge that where I am on the land of the Didigal people of the Eora Nation, and I pay my respects to the elders past, present and future. And I particularly wish to remember today my Aboriginal sister, Mainbanu, who died this morning in Nhulunbuy. And she was the leader of the community in Gupawiak in the Northern Territory. And so we pray that she might rest in peace.
Thank you, Carolyn. Very sorry to hear that, and my condolences.
Thank you.
Um, yes, thanks again for joining us. As I've just mentioned, Fair for All is the theme for this year's Fairtrade Fortnight. So I wanted to ask you, what do you see as the most pressing issues in the cocoa industry for farmers, for businesses, and for consumers?
Mm. That's a really good question. And I'll try and keep it brief, Sam. I won't give you an essay on it. I think one of the key issues is traceability. In basically, if you don't know where your cocoa comes from, you don't know what's happening there. And we're still in a situation where approximately 50% of cocoa is not traced to the farm gate. And of that 50%, some is only traced to the co-op. So obviously, modern slavery happens on a farm, not on a co-op, not in a community, although it's located in all of those places. So until we know where that comes from, we're not going to be able to adequately solve the problem. And if any of you read the sustainability reports of various businesses, one of the things you need to read is the fine print to see if they are talking about their whole supply chain or if they're only talking about their direct supply chain when they report on what they're doing. So that's a massive issue. Second issue is price. And some of you may have seen that the price of cocoa has doubled, sometimes tripled, since the beginning of this year. And if you've gone to the supermarket, you'll notice that the price of your cocoa, your favorite chocolate bar, has probably gone up. Now, people think, okay, the price has gone up. Realistically, a farmer probably needs to earn 4 to 5 times more than what they're earning to reach what we call a living income, which is a decent minimum standard of living. I won't go into all the details. Anna, you might be able to find that conversation article that Darian wrote and put it in the chat. But this increase in price is not rolling down to farmers because the prices are set by the government in places like Ghana and Cote d'Ivoire. The increase in price is going further up the supply chain, but not down to the farmer level. And farmers continue, in fact, the portion of the value chain that farmers receive will probably drop as a result of this price increase. And the third thing I'd say, Sam, that is a really big issue is increasing regulation external to cocoa producing countries. So there's a lot of regulation now happening out of the EU. They have a deforestation regulation, which means that for crops like cocoa and some others like soy and coffee and so on, it has to be proven that the cocoa comes from places which have not been deforested since 2020. And one of the issues with that is that it's estimated that there's about 1 million farmers. So that could be, more than that in terms of people who are actually growing cocoa in national forests. So what's that going to mean when this regulation comes in for them? It means that potentially the good cocoa, of which there may not be enough, I say good in inverted commas, the compliant cocoa will all be snapped up by Europe, and the rest will go to the places where this sort of regulation doesn't happen, like Australia and New Zealand.
Thank you, Carolyn. Yeah, those are 3 major issues that we as Fairtrade are also definitely yeah, on top of and kind of battling with as well. I think what jumps out to me from what you said is the complexity of the cocoa supply chain,
Mm.
and the number of stakeholders involved, from farmers through to businesses, traders, and with regulation, governments,
Yeah.
and those sorts of organizations. So I think, yeah, the next question I'd love to hear your response to is, who do you think is responsible for delivering ethical and responsible cocoa supply chains? Is it the farmers? Is it the businesses? Or is it the consumers?
Yeah. One of the things that we talk about in Be Slavery Free, and it actually came out of the World Cocoa Conference that was held in Abidjan, and that was really in Cote d'Ivoire. That was really the first time that everyone had gotten together in the same room. Now, when I say the same room, there were about 1,200 people there, but they were in the same room. And so you had farmers, you had traders, you had grinders, manufacturers, brands, retailers, government, and civil society. And what came out of that, which is something that we build on really solidly in Be Slavery Free, is the concept of a shared responsibility. And in a shared responsibility, each of those sectors has a responsibility. So government has a responsibility, and the UN. Local communities have a responsibility, because everyone who's trafficked or in child labour is trafficked from a community to a community. So those communities know way more about what's happening than anybody else. Business has a responsibility, because according to the human rights, UN guiding principles on business and human rights, a business is responsible for everything in its supply chain. Civil society has a responsibility to do good research and to be supporting of remediation. And then you have academics and unions and a number of other groups that also have a responsibility. And not only do they have a responsibility to do their part in ending this, but they also have a responsibility to keep the other sectors accountable. Because as soon as one sector is not playing its role, and another sector is tempted to take it over, it leads to the change being unsustainable. So we would say it's the shared responsibility of all those three, plus government, plus civil society.
Thanks, Carolyn. Yeah, I completely agree with you that it is definitely a shared responsibility. I think one thing that you mentioned there, which jumps out to me, is the as a word, is accountability.
Yes.
And I think, yeah, I'd love to delve into a little bit more about the work that you do with the Chocolate Scorecard, because I see that as a way of making businesses accountable to
Yep.
consumers
Yep.
ultimately. So I'm sure that many of us on this call are familiar with the Be Slavery Free's Chocolate Scorecard, but if not, could you please describe what it is and where the idea came from?
Sure. So back in about 2012 or 2013, we produced in Australia what we called the Good Egg Guide. And it was basically because people kept telling us that at Easter time they couldn't buy Easter eggs that had any kind of certification or identification that they were doing the right thing. And in fact, our very first Good Egg Guide had one Fairtrade certified egg on it. And we kind of did it as almost a bit of a joke, to say, well, here's your Good Egg Guide. There's only one that you can get. And that particular egg was a fairly small egg. It was probably, 5 or 6 centimeters. And it was sold in the major supermarkets, but it didn't get outside of the centre of the cities of Melbourne and Sydney. It didn't get to Adelaide, Perth, Brisbane. It didn't get to the outer suburbs of those cities before it all sold out. So that was where it started. Then as we started to work more solidly with business, because we see ourselves as working with business, and I'll explain that a little bit. Business started to say to us, can't you NGOs get your act together? There are 4 different chocolate scorecards that look at different things. Can't you get your act together? So 6 years ago, we brought together those 4 chocolate scorecards, and we combined what's being done on human rights and what's being done on environmental issues. So it's very much a collaboration. We have over 50 civil society organisations that are our promotion partners on the Chocolate Scorecard. So that's where the idea started. We don't see it as a punitive thing. We see it as an iterative thing. And so we work very closely with industry, and I think this is what makes it unique. So they get involved in every part of the process. So right now, we're just finalising the questions for next year, and they will go out and they will be subject to a consultation with civil society groups, academics, and chocolate brands that want to. And we ask them, is this the right question to be asking you? Is this the question that will help you to be able to progress in what you were doing? We then, we make the final decision about the questions. So, because sometimes they say, oh, we don't know that, but we think they should. So, so we do ask the questions still. And then if they want to, they can submit a draft of their answers, and one of the team who's not involved in the scoring will give them feedback. Then we do the scoring, et cetera, et cetera. The scorecard is released, and then we spend about 6 weeks with feedback sessions to all of the chocolate companies on why they received the score they received, and how they could improve for the next year. So it's very much a communal process that we're involved in. And so you see the chocolate scorecard that gets released at Easter. We have a year-round process that's started last week for the new scorecard.
Yeah, it's really incredible the amount of work that goes into it. I've read through the fine print, I think, on your website at one point. I'd encourage anyone else who hasn't to have a look, because it really is a great example of a very robust, but as you said, collaborative process. And I think it seems to me from what I've understood from it that really it's about driving the industry forward and making progress at each point. So yeah, I'd really encourage those who haven't delved into the detail to look into it, because I think it's really fantastic the work that you do. And on that point, the 5th edition of the scorecard was released in March of this year. I'd love to hear your thoughts on how it has evolved over time, and what have been, in your view, the greatest impacts on the cocoa industry.
Yeah, so when we started way back in 2011, 2012, no one in the industry would even use the term child labour, or let alone worst forms of child labour, or human trafficking, or modern slavery. And it wasn't until 2014 that the first company, even though this issue had been in the spotlight since 2001, it took until 2014 until the first company used those phrases. And that was a real breakthrough. You think, oh, that's simple, but that's actually massive, because it meant chocolate companies were saying, even if we use the phrase, we are admitting that it might be there. And every company said, yes, okay, we acknowledge the research, but you NGOs are beating it up more than you should, and it's not in our company. Well, when you're looking at 80% of the chocolate industry, which you are, or the chocolate brands that consumers buy, and there's 1.56 million children in forms of child labour, and it isn't in anybody's supply chain, there's something quite wrong there. It means that they haven't got the right systems in place. And we sometimes get contacted by journalists who say to us, oh, we went to West Africa and we found child labour. And we kind of go, well, duh. If you didn't find it, there'd be something wrong, because it's so pervasive. And when we talk about child labour, we're not talking about the kinds of things that make that are good for children's lives and socialization. Like, it's good for every kid to sweep the floor and tidy their bedroom and help with the gardening and unpack the dishwasher. We're talking about work that might be damaging to their psychosocial and physical development and health. So yes, that's been a huge change. But we were also told it wasn't possible to trace the cocoa supply chain. And now but we don't know exactly how much because it's a bit hard to get them to tell us, but somewhere between 40 to 60% of the cocoa supply chain is traced. So that's a real positive. The actions on child labour have increased phenomenally. And I don't want you to hear me putting down the companies because even though we think they could do way more, they are dealing with very complex problems that they don't know how to deal with. And realistically, no one knows how to deal with it. Because if we did, we would have fixed it. So we're all learning together, which is why we use such a collaborative methodology. People said it was impossible to pay a living wage or a living income to cocoa farmers. And now we have 6 companies that claim that they are paying that to some of them, and 80% of companies saying that a living income for cocoa farmers is a basic human right that they are aiming for. In the environmental area, we've seen agroforestry come onto the map. So that's regreening or reforesting or regenerating areas that have been deforested. And we've also introduced pesticide management. Now, when we first of all introduced pesticide management, which was 5 years ago, the results were so horrendous. We went to the companies and we said, we're not going to publish this because all hell will break loose in terms of you're not doing anything. So you've got a year to get your act into gear. We're now at a position where at least 50% of companies are taking strong action on pesticide management, but we've still got to bring the other 50% up. So there's some of the changes that we've seen over particularly the 5 years.
Yeah, that's a lot of change. And I think, from a business perspective, I think things like Tony's Open Chain is a way of businesses coming together and collaborating to make that positive chain kind of as a group. And it comes back to your point earlier around shared responsibility. I think you can't put the onus on maybe one company to solve all the problems on the cocoa supply chain. It's all the companies have to work together, as well as governments and as well as farmers and everyone involved, as you said. So yeah, some really amazing changes coming all the way back from the first scorecard. I think, this is, we'll have a lot of businesses, I'm sure, listening in and wondering how can we get involved with the scorecard if they're not already. Sure. And if they are involved, how do you see businesses generally engage with the scorecard to make those improvements over time?
Yeah. So what we introduced last year was a scorecard for small chocolate companies. So that's 1,000 tons of cocoa per year. Because small companies do things quite differently to large companies. And our inclusion of those companies really came about because Tony Chocolonely's came to us and in an inevitable Tony Chocolonely way said, why aren't we on the chocolate scorecard? And we almost responded and said, because you're too small. But then we actually realised that Tony's and some of the other small companies were actually creating the innovative processes that were going to bring about change. And whilst some processes of small companies are not easily scalable or replicable, that they are. Let me give you an example. There's a small chocolate company and they wanted to reduce their carbon footprint. So they bought a sailing boat and they actually sail from Holland to South America. They purchase their cocoa beans and then they sail back. They process their cocoa and then when their chocolate is distributed, they do it by push bike around Europe. Now you might think, okay, well, that's a great model. Like they score really well on the environmental issues on the chocolate scorecard because they're also organic. Um, but it's interesting. Another chocolate company, Valrhona, which is a trader, has just bought a sailboat to try and do the same with their cocoa from Madagascar. So even the wackiest kind of ideas can be replicated. So I would imagine the companies that aren't on this, that aren't already on the scorecard, that might be on this conversation or watching this, are small, and so we have a different scorecard for them, and we rank them against each other, not against the large companies. If you want to be on it, Sam, could you bring up the screen of the chocolate scorecard?
Yes, absolutely. I will.
So if you go to methodology, sorry, I told you I was going to go somewhere else, but I'm going to methodology.
It's okay.
Yeah, and you keep scrolling down. We describe our methodology in full. Keep going down. That's the cycle of what happens in a year. So keep going down again. And this just, some nice infographics. Keep going. What you will find down here is the questions, like explaining the 6 areas, and I think it's below here. Yep, so that's how that area works. That's how the scoring process works. And then you'll find the survey itself.
Okay.
So what we have there is the questions that were asked and how they were scored. And what we'd really encourage any new company to do is to actually look at this and decide if they want to answer the questions. So even without coming on the scorecard, you can look at these questions and say, well, this is where the industry is headed, and you can use it as part of a strategic plan. So, yeah, I would encourage people to, first of all, look at the kinds of questions that we're asking, and see how they fit in with what you're doing. And you might want to come on straight away, or you might want to wait a year or two.
Yeah,
but basically, email support@chocolatescorecard.com.
Fabulous. And I'm sure we can pop that email address in the chat. I'm sure it's also available on the website. But
Yep.
yeah, so almost use it as an internal self-assessment sort of scorecard checking tool, and see where you sit amongst the pile, maybe.
Yeah.
That's brilliant. Fantastic. And maybe while we're on the website, maybe we could just show people, and obviously I'm sure lots will be encouraged to go and have a look through the website, but you can scroll through and see the list of brands that are already on it across the different criteria. And you can search by brand here as well, right, Carolyn?
Yeah. So if you put the name in there, so we've got Tony Chocolonely coming up. It will do both brands and parent companies. So if you're looking for want to put in a particular brand, then it will come up with the parent company there. So try putting it in even if you can't see it. So yep, if we click on Tony's, this will show you where Tony Chocolonely's is at. They're doing incredibly well across the board. They were the top scoring company, second in traceability, and so on. It shows their global position. And if we keep going down, it shows what their product lines are, and it does a comparison of past scores. Now, each chocolate company that does this also has their own private page, and that private page, they can see how they were scored on every question.
Right. Yeah.
So that gives them a lot of deep information. But this is the aggregation of how they scored in each question.
Fabulous. And so easy and user-friendly for a consumer to pop on the website and type in a brand and see how they're doing, and compare amongst them. So yeah. Really fantastic.
Yeah. So that's how it works.
Thank you, Carolyn. So one final question before we jump into the Q&A section from me, which is, what is one action that farmers, businesses, and consumers can take to make the cocoa industry fair for all? I want to leave people with something to go away from, an action that they can take.
Yeah.
Do you have anything to share?
So most of the people on here will either be from chocolate companies or they'll be consumers. So consumers, check out the chocolate that you want to buy. And sometimes people say, but the best chocolates are more expensive. And we kind of go, yeah, you have to make that choice. You can eat lots of bad chocolate, or you can eat a more moderate amount of good chocolate and savor it. And I would say I'm not a professional chocolate taster, but I would say that the good chocolate tastes best as well. And I think there's been some evidence of that as well. So use the scorecard, decide what you're going to buy wisely. And if you do have a favorite brand that's not on the chocolate scorecard, encouraging them to go on the chocolate scorecard, and also tell them that you use it to make your choices. That's a really positive thing. For brands, I guess it's the, as you said, Sam, the chocolate scorecard. We know that sustainability staff, they have KPIs to improve their score on the chocolate scorecard. And the thing that I'd say is, if you're asking your sustainable, if you're using it as a strategic plan, which lots and lots of companies do, you also need, as a business, to resource what you're asking your staff to do. So yes, sometimes this will require a change to your business model. Sometimes this might require you to invest some funds, but we don't know a chocolate company that has done that regrets it. So there may be some out there, but they haven't come and complained to us. So and believe me, we do get complaints. So everybody wants to score really, really well, and not everybody can. So yeah.
Thank you. And I find it hard to believe that you get complaints. Such a great team. So yeah.
Oh, no, we do. Well, and they also complain to our colleagues if they don't complain to us. So, can you tell the chocolate scorecard? We go, well, they could come and talk to us. We're pretty available. So,
Fantastic. I think those are, yeah, great actions that everyone can take. And yeah, so we've got a few minutes left. If people want to pop their questions, if they have any, into the question and answer box. One has just popped through as I speak. The question is, says, thanks for that. Just a little further. In your opinion, what is the most effective method to mobilize consumers and businesses to actually make change? Is it showing positive change or shining a light on the horrors of the cocoa supply chain?
yeah,
It's a great question.
that's a fabulous question, Nadia. We be slavery free, and I think the answer to this question is probably different for different people and for different organisations. But be slavery free, we started out as the classic name and shame campaigning organisation. So we would say, we found modern slavery, bad company, bad company. We'd go to the media, we'd tell them that they were doing terrible things. And what we've found in most of the industries that we have been working in is that there's been a real turnaround that's probably happened in the last 10 years. And part of that is because there's now regulatory frameworks. So, for example, in Australia, we have a Modern Slavery Act, which requires companies to report on what they're doing to end modern slavery. Now, sometimes companies report that they've found modern slavery. You'll find Tony's Chocolonely says that they found X number of children in slavery. And we realised we could no longer say bad company, because they were actually had put in processes that meant that they found those children. And so they had processes that were working. And so we said, well, good company, you've got in place the processes, you're remediating what's happened, You're helping to replace the income of those farmers so that they don't have to use their children or they don't have to use traffic labour, and you're making a real difference. So probably around 2014, 15, which we started in 2005-06, we shifted to what we now call a name and fame. So in other words, we work with industry to agree on where are the key areas that change needs to happen. So if you looked at the first edition of this version of the Chocolate Scorecard, we had questions around, do you support due diligence legislation in the countries that you are located in? Now, we'd been working on that for about 3 or 4 years. 100% of companies said yes. Now, we don't have to ask that question anymore. So, because they've all said they're going to support due diligence legislation, and that's been shown out in the EU, where many of these companies are located, that they've supported the introduction of what's called the CS3D, Corporate Sustainability Due Diligence Directive of the EU. So we added in pesticides because that had come out as a really key area. And we've also put in a lens of gender in this last issue. We haven't put it as a 7th area because it's a cross-cutting theme. So there are people who do the shine the light on the horrors, and I think that has a place. But for us who've now worked with the industry for nearly 20 years, we find the agreeing on change and rewarding effort is the process that is working for us, and that's our contribution.
Thanks. That's really, really interesting. And I love that shame and fame framework. Yeah, I think, definitely something that I'll keep in mind. And I think the advocacy angle that you mentioned as well is really fascinating. And I think businesses being a positive voice for change in the advocacy space around things like due diligence. I know with the human rights and environmental due diligence is a big talking point in Europe. And I hope something that will move to Australia in future. I know Be Slavery Free as an organisation does a heap of work in the advocacy space. So again, I would encourage those on the call and on this webinar to explore a little bit more about Be Slavery Free's work in the wider advocacy space beyond cocoa as well.
So that's not to say that we don't call out people who are not doing well. So we do give the bad egg, and I think that's what we call it. So apparently, we used to call it the rotten egg, but apparently when that translates into some European languages, it's not helpful. So that's the other dilemma, is that we're actually working in about 11 different languages. So yeah, it's not that we don't call out, but I guess what we pride ourselves on is that our biggest fans are the companies who have previously been given the bad egg.
Yeah.
And they say, this was such a wake-up call for us and for our business that, thank you for calling us out and for walking with us to help us to know what to do next. And so, yeah, they're some of our biggest advocates, Nadia. So we think that's a good outcome if we call them out and they still like us. So
that is a great outcome, absolutely. I think we've got probably time for one last question. And it's one that maybe I'll just ask a question that I keep getting asked a lot from business. And you've mentioned it already, but cocoa prices are currently at an all-time high. At the same time, we have the cost of living crisis, which is hitting consumers' wallets very hard. So what do you say to those who think that sustainability is unaffordable in today's market?
I think you have to flip the question. I think you have to say, what happens if we decide it's not affordable? And the reality is we end up with an economic system that will collapse. Farmers are not going to keep working for nothing. So when we talk about this, and if you want to read the section on the website around living income, you're actually talking about some of the wealthiest companies in the world on our chocolate scorecard. You're talking about the largest privately owned company in the United States. You're talking about the largest distributor of food in the world. You're talking about the company owned by the wealthiest man in Italy, the third wealthiest man in Germany. So what we really need to look at is the value chain, that you have millions of farmers earning almost nothing. And then you have about 4 or 5 buyers, grinders, manufacturers, and then you have about 8 brands, and then you have millions of people wanting to eat chocolate. And the people who are making the most money are in that funnel of the hourglass in the middle, and the people who are disadvantaged are at the bottom. You can't have chocolate without cocoa beans. And so if you want chocolate, we're going to have to do something about a better distribution in that value chain.
Absolutely. And I think that echoes so much with what Fairtrade is about. You can't have functioning supply chains without farmers, and we're all about trying to put farmers first, and ensuring that they have a voice in those supply chains. So I think that's a really, really great place to end. Carolyn, thank you so much for your time. I've certainly taken away a lot from our discussion, and I really appreciate your time.
And all the best for Fairtrade Fortnight. I hope you have lots of successful activities, and I think, Sam, we're going to make this recording available to people if they want it. Is that right?
Yes, absolutely. We'll make the recording available. We'll share it to those who have signed up, and we'll also probably share it on our channels as well.
Right.
So thank you again, and happy Fairtrade Fortnight, everybody.
Great. Thank you.
Thank you. Goodbye.